and welcome to What's Next with Dr. Joe. This is the podcast where rule breakers, system shakers, and beautifully conventional and unconventional career stories live so that you can begin to imagine a world of work that is right for you. This episode will explore the amazing Hayley Scrivenor's career and creative life as an example of a non-linear, self-shaped pathway in the world of work. Hayley, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
It's so great. I am a fangirl of your work. Dirt Town is honestly, I'm not to say this, one of my favorite books of all time, and I recommend it to everyone. And I know you've won a whole lot of awards for Dirt Town, but you don't know that you actually won another really special award. I used to be part of a book club, and every year what we'd do is everyone would nominate a book, and it had to be a book that no one had read, right? Even the person who did the book. So I put forward Dirt Town because I'd heard someone review it on the ABC and I was like, that sounds like a great book. We read it, got 10 out of 10 and won book of the year for my book club. So I know how honoured you must be.
I'll put it in my study, try to play.
Yes. We had a reunion and I told the book club, oh, I've got Hayley coming on the podcast. They can make sure you tell her she won book of the year. So I was like, that's just for them.
I can add it to my bio.
Yes.
Does your book club have a name? Is it like the Bookish Divas or something?
Book clubbers.
Book clubbers. All right. Good to know.
No. Yeah. So I wanted to have you on, not just because you're an amazing writer, but because you are an amazing writer, and would love to just talk about how you became a writer and what that career pathway looks like. Because I know, particularly in the arts and in writing, there would be a lot of people that say, I want to be a writer. And they probably met with a lot of like, okay, whatever, like keep dreaming. And so I wanted to talk to you about how that actually works, like how you can make it a career, how you can, how you can write and publish and create quite a name for yourself. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Well, I love talking about this because I think a lot of writers fall into one of two camps. There's either writers who, knew they wanted to be writers from very young and they sort of saw that job and that was a job that they wanted. And then there are kids like me who loved reading, but it sort of didn't occur to me that that was something that a person could even do. I thought if you were going to be a writer, there would be a special birthmark that would like activate in the moonlight. Yeah. Like someone would send you a letter, and be like, actually, just so you know, you are one of the chosen ones and you are going to get to do this thing that you admire so much.
Yes.
So I kind of received books as this end product that came from people that lived on a higher plane than I did, Yeah. Right. And I was really not someone who, I didn't study creative writing at university in my undergraduate. It was, I did extension English. I loved all of that, but I didn't grow up with a lot of money. It didn't seem like something that someone who wanted to one day own a house and, eat something other than 2-minute noodles could attempt to do. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started volunteering for my local writers festival, actually. So I grew up near Wagga, but I did high school and live in Wollongong now, and started volunteering for the Wollongong Writers Festival, which was such a great way into that sort of place of thinking of writers as these amazing special people, meeting them and realizing like, no, these are just a bunch of weirdos.
Yeah.
And the one thing they seem to have in common is that they had decided to back themselves.
Yeah.
So they came from a range of different backgrounds and, were just very different people. And I realized that I could be one of those people if I was willing to kind of put in the time. And really, I think what a creative career is the art of learning how to back yourself. And it's scariest at the beginning because, now it's fairly easy to back myself. I can kind of, if nothing else, I can open a published book that I've written, or I can look at an award, or I can, call my editor, and get some kind of affirmation. But really the beginning is the hardest, and all you have is this hunch that maybe there's something that you want to do. And I sort of say I came to writing because it was the one thing I was willing to tolerate being really bad at for a long time, because becoming a writer wasn't, oh, I'm going to write some stuff and people will tell me it's great, and then it's this constant upward trajectory. Yeah. For me, writing a novel was really, or becoming a writer was a process of going, okay, I have a lot to learn and I'm excited to do that learning, and this is something I'm willing to kind of commit time to, even though there is no guarantee. And I think every writer who makes it, quote unquote, whatever that means for each writer, has in common at some point that they took significant time and space away from other potentially much more productive things to follow this hunch that they had that they might have something to say, and something to write about.
Yeah, so that's so it was like you knew you had something to say, but knew the craft was something that you had to learn.
I
But you
would say
felt like you could eventually get there. There must have been something in you that thought, okay, I'm not there now, but I know I can be.
yeah, it's interesting to hear you put it like that, because it does sound like I thought I had something to say, but actually the scary part was I knew I wanted to write and I wanted to write a book, but I actually didn't feel like I had something to say. I felt
Right.
like I wanted to do this thing and I wanted the end product, but I had no idea how to go from me, a slightly weird kid from a small country town who was, I studied languages at uni and I loved learning languages, but I would, and I had when I started getting involved with the Writers' Festival, I started writing a couple of short stories, but they weren't really my form. I was like, I think I really want to write a novel. And it was more that hunch than like, oh, I want to write a novel about this thing.
Right.
And I think sometimes that almost sounds a bit grubby. Like, oh, I didn't come to it because I wanted to tell this story of, my first book is about a missing girl. And I came to love those characters very much and care very deeply about them. And you don't finish a book without, really having a sense that this was a story that you wanted to tell by the end. But it's okay if at the beginning you kind of just have this vague idea of, yourself on the Sydney Writers' Festival stage. I mean, I felt really guilty and shameful at the time, but I did kind of, that was the biggest thing I could see, was just my name on a book. And then what I had to do was kind of bring myself back down to the level of the sentence and the craft and go, what are other writers doing that I admire? How do I find a way to tell a story that I can tell well, which is very different to writing the kinds of books that you love, actually. There's a point where you
Oh,
sort of
so
realize, like,
interesting.
oh, this is what my first book is about. And it can be quite a sad thing, because you realize, like, oh, it's not going to be this kind of book or that kind of book. It's going to be, in my case, I wrote about the town where I grew up,
Yes.
which was the last thing in the world I wanted to do, actually.
Yeah.
And yet, when I sat down to write about it, I seemed to have the details and have something to say about it, which was unfortunate, because when I was looking for something to say, I didn't think that was the thing that I was going to have something to say about. So it's sort of an accident. It's sort of, you don't really get to pick what you end up being able to write about, I think.
Yeah.
Which all sounds a bit whimsical. I think really practically, though, what I did is I started hanging out with other writers and I
Yes.
started hanging out with other creative people.
Yeah.
And that made me realize, like, the whole point is that there is no blueprint for this book. If this book
Yeah.
already existed, you wouldn't need to write it.
Yeah.
So the whole point is kind of that finding that time and space away and just committing to something and letting it grow, and being surprised by what it turns out to be.
So that's so fascinating. Let's go back. So you decided you go to the Writers' Festival and you're like, oh, actually, I could be one of these people, and you're hanging around and you're hearing about what how different people um, work at their craft. But when was the moment you then did you start writing small bits and pieces? Like, how did you go about writing the novel? Because I know it was part of a PhD, right? Did you was it through the PhD that the novel came, or was it
Yeah,
before that?
so definitely my novel is a PhD novel. So
Yeah,
it is what I said and I'll kind of talk you through the steps of that. So
yeah,
going from having written nothing, deciding I want to write, I started writing sort of short pieces and trying to get them published, basically because I really wanted to be like, Hayley Scrivenor is a writer based in Wollongong. Her work is found in ABC, because that seemed to be,
right,
I didn't know much about the writing world, but all these writers seem to have like stories in ABC. So I was like,
yeah,
okay, I'll at least write 3 decent short stories, and then I'll be
yeah,
able to put something in my kind of bio.
yeah,
And then what happened was I lied to my boss at the time. So I had done uni, done honors, gotten a
yeah,
grad job working somewhere in the university. So
right,
I was on campus.
yeah,
And I let my boss at the time believe that I was going to Masters of Business classes.
right,
I didn't outright lie. I just kind
right,
of let certain bits of information pass uncommented on.
right,
Um, I just, I said I want to do this extra education. It will mean that I need to leave at 3:30 on a
right,
Thursday, and so that was fine.
yeah,
And so I went off and I had enrolled in this second year creative writing class,
right,
that I was very lucky to be able to get into even.
yeah,
But I used those short stories that I'd written to be like, can I come in here? And I don't want to enroll in the whole degree. I just want to study in this class and see what I can learn. And there I met the woman who'd go on to be my PhD supervisor. She read the very first short story that I'd ever written and said, I think you could write a novel, which is a huge vote of confidence for someone who was just desperately seeking that external validation. And so I kind of just did exactly what she said. And within 6 months, I had quit my perfectly good full-time job, with superannuation and some kind of career path. And I had talked my way into a creative writing PhD. And the best part of that was I was able to get a scholarship. So, amazing. Which for context is about $26,000 a year.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
It's $500 a week, which, I was living with my partner and some roommates, and then we lived on a boat briefly to save money. Like, it was not a lot of money, but it was enough for it to be my job, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing a full-time PhD.
Yeah, and a little sidebar, because I got a scholarship too, lucky enough to do my PhD, but that was 20 years ago, and it was 30 grand 20 years ago. And I can't believe that it is still 30 grand. Like that's insane. I mean, I could really live on that, 20 years ago.
Well, and it goes to, a lot of writing prizes, writing short pieces, like those money amounts have not gone up as the cost of living has really gone up. Yeah. Which makes, when you are trying to, I really feel without the PhD, I couldn't have committed to writing full time, obviously.
Yeah.
And it had a lot of other advantages. It had the fact that I had a supervisor who was regularly reading my work and giving me feedback. I had an office to go to. And I think the biggest thing was I had a deadline that was very far in the future, because, the PhD, I ended up doing mine in 4 years with some time off in the middle. So I handed in the day the money ran out, essentially.
Yeah.
Because that was my thing. I was like, I can't be doing this and not getting any money, because then I'll be trying to do it and, doing other things that would get in the way. And I did, of course, work throughout my PhD as well. One of the things is you become relatively cheap labor for the university. So I was teaching creative writing, which was quite fun because, and by fun, I mean terrifying, because I hadn't studied creative writing undergraduate. Yeah. And so I would show up to these sort of second and third year classes.
Yeah.
And there's an old Simpsons episode where Marge, tells her daughter Lisa she's going to teach piano. And Lisa says, but you don't play piano. And she's like, I just need to stay 1 week ahead. Teaching creative writing when I was sort of 6 months into writing a novel and hadn't studied it formally. But it was really, really good for my writing to be forced to explain things and to be. I really do think that teaching for me is the best way to learn, because I have to actually understand something before I can move on, because I know that I'm going to have to explain it to someone. You can't just kind of go, oh yeah, that's something about that,
Yeah, I agree with that, because there's that old, there's that dumb saying around, those who can't do teach. It's actually quite hard to teach the doing as well. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It does, as you say, articulate what it is, having that kind of meta conversation with yourself and others about what it is you're actually doing. It does add so much value.
Yeah, and if you're saying to someone, look, a good piece of dialogue, for example, people should be speaking at cross purposes sometimes, or there should be a rhythm, and we should be able to look at the conversation and break it up into beats and see where there's a transfer, and until you actually do that and show people, you can't expect them to kind of believe you, so you put up a conversation, you see how they start out talking about this, and then there's an energy shift, and then there's this energy shift. I really enjoy teaching because there's nowhere to hide. If I haven't understood what makes a good piece of dialogue, then I'm not going to be able to teach it to other people.
Yeah, and students will pick up on that pretty easily as well.
Yeah, and I think also just it kind of comes back to being around writers being really good for me as a writer, because it's sort of a shared delusion. You kind of are all working towards this end, which is... which you've been told your whole life is sort of, in my case anyway, maybe not everybody has this baggage. And it certainly didn't come from my immediate family or anything, but it was just this feeling like, oh, what a luxury to be able to sit around and make up stories. But it's actually hard yakka,
Yes.
It's hard to do. And my writer friends and I talk about, civilians, and they don't understand how we suffer. But, I forget who said it. Might have been Maggie Farrell. It's like, it's not digging ditches in the rain, it is joyous work if you can if you can get it. It's all the uncertainty comes from all the other factors.
Yeah, but do you think this, assuming that you grew up in a rural town, somewhat kind of like working class or middle class, don't you think that it's that thinking behind that it's like you can't actually enjoy your work? Like if you're enjoying your work, it's not work.
Yeah,
like,
it's a weird.
When you're in the working class, it's like, because I remember like an academic, I said to her once I'd kind of was working in the university at kind of a project level, and I was like, oh, it doesn't take me as long to do things. And she's like, you just have that working class mentality that unless it's gritty and it's 8 hours, like you forget about the intellectual kind of part of your work.
I really agree with that. And also the counterpoint to that is we kind of, my generation, I think, also grew up with this idea that you should really love your work. And
right.
I think sometimes I've dealt with a lot of shame around my first book because I thought I have been given this opportunity to write it, and I'm writing it so slowly and so poorly, and all that self-talk. And so I was like, I'm not really enjoying it. So does that mean that I'm not meant, this is not my, like, it's kind of the glass slipper approach, which I think is actually really dangerous. This idea that there is one job or one thing that you can do out there that will complete you. And it's sort of, I think being a creative person is something that is a big part of me, but also it's not everything.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes there can be pressure if you work in a field that, sounds cool to other people or sounds interesting or sounds like it should be fun. Every job is going to bring with it things you like and things you don't like.
Yes.
And your ability to kind of be a person with who cares about things outside of that, and who is lives up to values that you follow, and who has a sense of self outside of that, has actually been one of the biggest things I've had to learn as a writer, beyond all the technical and beyond thousands of hours in the chair. It is actually, how do I separate myself from this work and view it as something that I do instead of something that I am. And I think everybody in any job has to figure that out. But writing seems to be, because we show up and we speak about our work and we ask things about our work, which is lovely, it can feel like those two things become harder to separate.
Yeah, so agree with that. I think it is this, and I hope, really through this podcast too, that we start to kind of complicate those two things around, you do want a career that you love and you're connected with. But as you say, any job has days where there's grit and where there's repetition, and there's the unenjoyable parts of that. It's not all fairies and fun. That anything worth doing does have things that are hard about it.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a game of choose your suffering, which doesn't sound optimistic, but I think it actually is a deeply optimistic thing to realize anything I do will come with some kind of discomfort. And it's sort of like, is it a good kind of discomfort? In the grand, am I in a job where I regularly feel worthless versus am I in a job where today was hard?
Yeah. But you can see the progression. So, as you say, working on, I would imagine, sentence after sentence and paragraph to get it like right. That's hard work, but you can see where it's going to lead. You can see that end point. So there's going to be struggle and difficulty, but if you can see where it's leading, then those things are easier to kind of do.
Yeah, and I think any person, and I'll just talk about novelists because, that is what I know. But I do think so much of my job is just keeping myself in the game in some way, like finding a way to work that leads to more work, because what I do is so self-directed. I'm incredibly lucky that I write full-time. I do some teaching, and I used to teach at university, and now I do mainly kind of private teaching through writer centers or other organizations. And I love that work because I find it really energizing and it sits well with the writing. But I still, every day, you still have to kind of find a way to engage with a project that you want to finish and that you would love to know how it ends or how it's all going to come together. And unfortunately, the only way to do that is to keep re-engaging with it. And there are days where you honestly would have been better off just staying in bed.
Yeah.
Because you've cut the one good thing that was in the scene, or it's so nebulous. It's so, it's not like, when I used to do an office sort of admin job, or when I did disability care, I'd be like, no, I did a good job. Like I was there
Yes.
on time and I did these things, which were
Yes.
the outcomes that were expected, and then I
Yeah.
went home. And writing is more about how do you motivate yourself to feel like
Mm.
you met some outcomes that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've written this book for the PhD. What I wanted to know is then, did you or did your supervisor think, oh, this is something like this is going to be then a published work that people will buy?
Well, I definitely, one of the things I knew early on is that I wanted the book. There is a sort of phenomenon of like the PhD book, which is wildly experimental and
Yeah.
maybe really interesting way of thinking through a concept, but
Yeah.
doesn't kind of make you sit there and want to read it in a compelling way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what a PhD is for. It's
Yeah.
for those
Yeah.
forms of, and I'm glad that exists. But
Mm.
in the back of my own head, I thought I really want this to be a book that someone will willingly pick up and read, not for
Yes.
research, but because it's a cracking yarn.
Yeah.
And so that was one of my own kind of personal goals.
Mm.
And so I very much, and because I've always been fascinated, I'm endlessly fascinated by the kind of industry, and I listened to
Yeah.
endless podcasts. I really wanted to know how the industry worked. And
Mm.
I always felt that I wanted to take this creative, artistic thing and make it work in a marketplace, because then that meant I would get to write more of them. Like that seemed to make sense
Yes.
to me.
Yeah.
But it's important to say there was a point with Dirt Town, and it's hard when something does well because there's this sense of inevitability about it. Like, oh, of course,
Right.
it was always going to be a
Yeah.
number one bestseller. It was always going to sell overseas. It
Yeah.
was always,
Yeah.
Anne Cleese was always going to endorse it, and it was always going to, all these things
Yeah.
were going to happen. But there was a point where I really thought that only my mum and my PhD supervisor would read it, because
Yeah.
it was this misshapen, thing in a Word document that I knew too much about,
Yeah.
So I think, though, doing that research and engaging with what people said about how to go about becoming, a professional writer, or in some way getting my work out there, was useful. And, the best advice I got for me personally was to look at getting an agent, which I think for someone like me who is not the best at putting my work forward, was the absolute best thing I could have done, because an agent then is responsible for selling your work, and they create things like buying, sort of bidding auction spree type things. And that's what really changed my life. And that's why I can write full time now.
Yeah.
So people often say, do I need an agent? I'm like, well, you don't need an agent to be a published author. That's not factually the case. But do you need an agent to have a long and sustainable career? It certainly helps. And it's been my experience that it really, like I said, changed my life. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And can I just go back to that decision too? Because I'm interested in this, because I've had, say, young people say they want to be a writer, and part of my question back to them is, well, do you want it to be a career? Like, do you want it to be something that creates a wage for you? Because that's a different kind of writing. You'd have to then really look at the market and the industry, and you'll have to frame your writing around that. Or do you just want to write, and do you want to just self-publish? And so I feel that there's, you can be a writer and it not be your full-time job. But if you decide that I would just want to spend my time on writing, then I feel like you do have to make the decisions you made around, okay, what's the industry? How does the industry look? What do I need what do I need this novel to look like for it to be able to sell? And you can still keep the artistic, merit of your writing, which is one of the things I really love about your writing, is that it is both a great story and really well written. So you can still have those things and it sell. But I feel like there is a choice then around how a story is shaped when you make the decision around, this is my career and this is where I'm going, or this is just something that I do on the side as a passion.
It's interesting you say that, because I sort of disagree with you in terms of, like, I definitely think when I'm talking about being a professional and wanting to place the book in a good way, those are decisions that actually feel really separate from the book. So for me, I think the best commercial advice I can give anyone is to write the book that they deeply, deeply want to write and that only they can write. Now, that won't have a guaranteed commercial success, but it is my belief that if you write the book that, and when I say want to write, it's not necessarily the book. Like I said, I didn't want to write about the small town where I grew up, but it was a place that I felt compelled to write about, and that when I came to the page, things seemed to come out that were more powerful than other things that I was trying to write. And so there's this, Flannery O'Connor said, you can choose what you write, but not what you make live on the page. So I'm a big believer that it's writing your best work, whatever that looks like, tends not to happen when you're thinking about how best am I going to sell this.
Okay.
Because by the time you've tried to catch up with whatever trend you perceive is happening, books have a long lead time. A lot of people's first books don't come out until 2 years after they've first submitted them, for example. So you've kind of missed that wave. Whereas if you write, a really fantastic, really strange book about the summer you worked in an ice cream factory, but it's one of those books that connects and it says something through being very specific, says something universal and is well written and connects to people. I don't know, and maybe that's naive because that was my experience. But I never was like, great, I'm writing a really commercially successful book. What I did is I wrote the book that I really felt I had to write and wanted to write and was able to write. And then I was more strategic with that as a kind of product. Because the thing about a book is it's the only art form that it's a piece of art, in its Word document, I believe, I'm working on a piece of art, but then it becomes kind of like a can of soup because my agent has to sell it to a publisher. That publisher has to sell it to booksellers. Those booksellers have to sell it to people. It becomes a commodity. Like it looks a certain way. You try and send out tasters to people to see if they'll like it and tell other people that the soup is good. But all of that is kind of only possible if you've made the heartfelt recipe, to really kind of painfully extend that metaphor. Like I do believe when I talk about being kind of commercially savvy, it was more about researching what kind of agent would work for me or what sort of, whose advice am I going to follow? And one of the best things that ever happened to me is that I lost a writing prize. I came sort of second, unofficially second. They called me and said, look, you didn't win, but you almost won. And if I had won that prize, my book would have been published by a major publisher and that would have been amazing, but it would not have gone to auction in the way that it did, which means it probably wouldn't have sold overseas and I wouldn't be able to be writing full time now. So a bit of it's luck as well. Like it's not that you can and it's getting the right advice on the sort of business side of it. And being lucky, but I think all of that comes back to writing the book that is the thing that only you can write. I really do believe there is something in that, because if you're writing for a kind of general audience, you're kind of writing for no one. You're writing for your idea of people are smarter than that. I think they can tell. Sally Rooney, the Irish author, that everybody goes absolutely crazy about. She has this quote I love, which is, you can feel however you want about my book, but just know that if you feel it like it was sincere, like I came to it with a full sincerity. So if you thought it was bad, know that it was sincerely bad. It wasn't bad because I'm trying to get one over you. It was bad because there was a mismatch in what we're looking for. But I gave you everything that I had to give in that book. And I really do think that obviously there's like vampire erotica that doesn't meet this. Like there are writers
I know what you're saying. I really love that.
That everyone has to have a different relationship to art and commerce in a way. But I do think if you from the beginning are thinking only of the commerce, then the art will not happen. Whereas if you think a lot about the art, there's a point where you can start thinking seriously about the commerce where they don't cancel each other out.
No, I do love your version.
Sorry about that little rant.
But no, I love that rant. I love
because
that.
I think,
it makes me think about everything about careers too, because it is like, if you try and fit yourself into a box too much, eventually it doesn't feel right. I think what you're kind of saying is always being authentic to yourself and your voice is like of the utmost importance.
Well, and I think the people that do, like, I remember in high school people saying a lot to me like, oh, there's not a lot of money in that, or there's not a lot of opportunity in that. And it's like, well, if you really want to do something, and I do believe in having, a plan B. Like the average Australian author makes less than $13,000 the Australian Society of Authors, I think it might have been Macquarie Uni. There's a couple of different studies, but people that self-report on their tax returns as working, Australian writers are earning on average less than $13,000 a year, which no one can live on.
No.
And for me, before Dirt Town did as well as it did, the plan was that I would teach and I would write. There was always the opportunity that I could go back and do kind of the office admin stuff that I'd been doing. And I think it's actually a gift to your creative self to not make your creative output support you. certainly at the beginning, because just no one's going to want to give you any money.
Yeah.
But even there are writers that I really admire, and it's not until their seventh or eighth book that they're actually able to do it full time. You know, which is astonishing. Can you know, if you're an engineer and it took,
Yeah. I know, right?
you know, like it took 7 or 8
20 years. Yeah,
degrees,
yeah.
kind of like
Yes.
it's not a meritocracy. Things get, you know, I think Dirt Town came at a lucky moment, and was I was lucky because I had worked really hard. Like I was in the right place
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
right time. But there is an element of, it's not, oh, if you just write a book good enough, it'll definitely sell. That's, you know, not what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But I think the best way to navigate towards success is to kind of invest in your own, I guess, your own what you tend towards, or what you really
Yeah.
have to offer versus another person.
Yes.
Whereas sometimes we think, oh, if I just do what other people value, that will be the best way to make money.
Yeah.
Whereas it's something about orienting yourself towards what you value.
Yeah. Gosh, I love this. Can we go? Because you've said, you know, you didn't think you'd write this novel. So what was it that you started to write then, or how did
Yeah,
it
no,
come
that's a great
about?
point. I love telling people this. So
Yeah.
so with the PhD, you have to submit a kind of proposal. So
Yeah.
I was going to write a novel set in space.
I love
It was going to
space.
be
I
like
would have read
space
that too.
detectives. You know, I grew up,
I so would have read that book.
I
Anyway, keep
loved
going.
Douglas Adams, you know,
Oh
as
yeah,
as a
yeah, yeah.
kid, and
Yeah.
I wanted to do this slightly wacky. I really love, my PhD was on unusual points of view. So,
Yeah.
you know, when you read a book, it's, you know, it's being narrated by a particular person from a particular vantage point, you know, and I was really interested in how can I do that in the wackiest way possible.
Yeah.
But then I was really struggling to write this wacky, amazing book that I
Yeah.
could kind of envisage in my head. And was writing a short story
Yeah.
to try and get published somewhere. And I started writing about the town where I grew up, and I started writing about how the kids in my town would get home from school. It was really as
Right.
simple as that.
Yeah.
So the story really, I realized if all these kids were describing how they got home from school,
Yeah.
I realized something bad must have happened, because that's the kind of thing you do. You know, you could, like, where were you on 9/11, or
Yeah.
what were you
Yeah.
doing the day that this thing happened? And I
Yeah.
realized the thing they all had in common is that they lived in a town where a girl hadn't come home from school, and that, you know, they were
Right.
talking about how they had got home and she hadn't. And
Yeah.
that really became Dirt Town. You know, it's crazy to think when you
Yeah.
look at the finished book that, you know, I didn't even start with Esther. You know, I started with a bunch of kids walking down various dusty driveways and on the school bus, but that seemed to have a quality that my other writing didn't have. And again, it comes back to the detail, or the, I guess I felt, I was like, oh, maybe this is the thing I have to say. You know,
Yeah.
this is the thing I know about. And
Yeah.
the tricky thing is, the stuff you know about can seem really boring to you. And it wasn't until I showed other people, they're like, oh no, this is good. Like
Yeah.
I want more of this. And
Yeah.
I remember my PhD supervisor at the time, quite rightly, because if a student came to me, you know, sort of 3 months into a PhD and wanted to drastically change project, I would be
Yeah.
a bit concerned, because writing a
Yes.
book is hard, and sometimes you do just
Yes.
need to push through.
Yeah.
But I kind of pitched her, and she read the what I had written, and she said, yeah, okay, I think this might be it, but no more changes.
Yeah. No more changes.
So then
Yeah.
I spent, you know, the next sort of 4 years
Wow.
as part of the PhD, and then
Yeah.
another 2 years of sort of editing and the publishing process, which is joyful, and I love so much. Working with professional editors is really one of the privileges of being a writer, I think.
Yeah. And I think it definitely, in Australia there are voices in lots of mediums that we don't hear. And I know, you know, there's a really strong writing culture in Western Sydney where I grew up and live now. And even though a lot of the writers that come from there are writing from a BIPOC, people of colour perspective, I still identify so much with their writing because they're talking about the town that I grew up in. Like I can see, and you don't get that a lot. So I can imagine, you know, why, you know, even though it is boring and every day, you're like identifying it with it, because like, oh, that's how, even though I didn't grow up in a rural town, I did identify with kids
Yeah.
from primary school coming home from school in the hot sun. And I absolutely love the Greek chorus. That was why I actually bought the book. Was in the review that I heard, they said, you know, that the kids are kind of spoken about in this Greek chorus. And as a theatre nerd, I was like, oh, I love that idea. Hey, pussycat.
He's such a sook. He just wants to be held. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I don't mind. What's the cat's name?
This is Mouse Guard, or
Hey,
Mouse in
Mouse Guard.
short. He's
Okay,
named after my favourite Norwegian writer, but because I love a pun.
Okay.
But he's not normally allowed in here, but it's just so hot today that I had to keep the door open to get some cool air. So
that's fine.
He's taking advantage.
That's okay.
It's not very professional of me. I'm sorry.
I don't mind. It's authentic. We were talking about authenticity. So you have this story about the kids coming home, and then how did the rest of it kind of come to shape?
I think what happened was I was lucky that, like I said, okay, someone's not here, someone's not come home from school. And in that moment, I had the only kind of flash of inspiration that, I really don't believe in inspiration. I'm not someone who sort of sits and communes with her muse, like I really do kind of think of myself as grinding out my books. Like I just ask a lot of questions and I write a lot of stuff that gets cut. But I realized, she's not coming home from school because she's dead, which is not a spoiler. She's in the first couple of pages. And I sort of knew who had killed her, and that was one of the first things I knew. And I kind of spent the rest of the book writing towards that outcome. And so it was really great to have that ending, because I do think I needed to know it to be able to kind of work through the rest of the book, but I didn't know any of what happened in the middle. So there, I kind of, what was helpful, like I said, is I was writing about a place I knew well. And so I would just kind of write things about that place, and then I would find they would connect up. You slowly start to introduce characters. There's the missing girl, so she must have a mum, and then I realized she must have a best friend.
Yes.
And then there was another character that got introduced because I realized he sees her on the last day after school before she's kind of one of the last people to see her. But he's too afraid to tell anyone because of what he was doing when he saw her. And so that stuff suggests story. You kind of go, okay, I can do something with that. But it's only by sitting with them, and it's a series of stepping stones, because if I don't know that the girl's missing, then I can't know about the boy that sees her, and he's got a secret and I don't know what that secret is, but I'll step over here and see if it might be this, and then no, that's not the secret, and you step back and you try a different stepping stone.
And I loved, not only are you kind of telling this story about a rural town, but you also, there are a couple of queer characters in this novel too, which I think was really good to see in such a normal way, if that makes sense. Like,
it's kind
of
didn't become a pout.
It's not the point of the novel, but they're there. Which I think, so there were all these kind of themes that do actually tell you that this is a real town. That's how I felt. Like that all these things are actually, you really felt like it was real.
Well, that is such a compliment to a writer, because I think as much as I love making stuff up, like there are writers who really gather a lot of stuff from life, whereas I feel like there's a lot of stuff about childhood and a lot of stuff that I remembered, but the plot certainly is completely, from my own twisted mind. I never knew anyone who went missing or any of that. And so when you feel like you can take people on a journey through that, and that the magic kind of works. Because the sad thing, and what no one tells you, is that you write a book because you want to be a writer, because you want to feel the way that books make you feel. But by the time you've written the book, it kind of doesn't hold any charm for you, because you know exactly what happens. You know exactly every kind of nuance and rejected scene, and so you kind of are not that impressed with it by the end.
Right.
None of it is surprising or particularly magical to you, because you know it so well. But what I've realized is you get to put it out in the world, and you get to be involved in this kind of cycle where other books come into your life and make you feel that way, and you get to pass on a book that hopefully makes anyone feel, a tenth of what I feel when I read a book that I love. All right. Okay.
I'd love to hear then about the agent process and how hard it was for you to get an agent. So obviously you have a very, high quality novel there, no doubt about that. But then how does it then go from agent and to then published? And then
I get asked a lot, how do I get an agent? And my really annoying question is always, write the best book that you absolutely can first, which sounds really unkind, but it is actually, until you have spent considerable time on it, it has been read by all your smartest friends. And I had a paid editor look at it. I was lucky enough, I was shortlisted for a prize where one of the prizes was you got it looked at by a professional editor. And I got an assessment that suggested some changes, some of which I made, some of which I didn't, but it definitely made the book better. So until you've really been through that process, like it's not ready for an agent to look at, because agents in Australia, it's actually harder to get an agent in Australia than it is to have your book published, which might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's because agents are kind of advocates, and they know the industry, they know what publishers are interested in. They're in a position to say, okay, these 3 publishers are all going to like the book, so we'll tell them all about it at the same time. And that's when you get the kind of life-changing book contracts where you're going to be able to keep writing, or let it take up more time in the mix of work and writing. So what happened with me, it really was in a very good state. Like, it was as good as I sort of possibly could make it. And then I had started sending to agents overseas, I think because I guess I was sort of in that writing world through the festival, and I was really nervous that I would meet someone and they'd go, oh my God, your book was so bad. I remember you.
No.
I was so nervous. So I was sending it to agents in the UK and the US. I didn't, just because they wouldn't laugh. I wouldn't be able to hear them laughing at me.
That's hilarious.
And then I got a residency, which was amazing. I cried. It was the first time I really felt like I'd been anointed as a writer by by some external force. Well, it was similar to the PhD supervisor thing. And you never run out of needing that kind of external validation. But there I was very lucky to meet a writer named Eleanor Limprecht, and I told her what, she was asking me about agents, and she said, you need an Australian agent because you live in Australia, and so as scary as it is, you kind of do need someone in your own country to be fighting for your work, because otherwise it's going to feel like it's all happening somewhere far away. And that was really good advice, because, and then I don't think she necessarily was saying this, but I sent it to her agent because she had talked about who her agent was. And one of those like fluke things, I sent it to Grace Heifetz, and she read it literally, I think I sent it at midnight on Friday, and she'd read it by Sunday afternoon. Emailed me and said, I love this, let's do this, basically. And I knew how highly regarded she was and what a good agent she was. And it was just freak luck. But I had been rejected, dozens of times before that. And actually, once Grace was on board, an agent that I had been talking to in the UK who liked the book but had ultimately said no, came back on board once she heard that I had such good Australian representation. So books, it comes back to the soup analogy in a way, like you want as many people as possible being like, damn, this is good soup. Because it's so hard to get people that eat soup for a living to get excited about another kind of soup,
Yes.
If you can get those key kind of tastemakers to really continue to murder this metaphor, then good things happen, and the right people eat your soup and life is good.
Yes. So was she the first Australian agent you sent it to?
Pretty much. I had sent it earlier when it wasn't ready, so it really and it really is such a common thing to do, is that you want to be finished, and so you send it. So and the unfortunate reality is often you do that and that actually shuts that door forever, which is what I kind of didn't know at the time, but what I really try and bring home to all any students or emerging writers that I come in contact with, like, you really want to go out with a version of the book that multiple people have told you kind of put them on their bum, like that's how good it was. Because agents and publishers have such a short attention span. Gone are the days where they would really, and there are exceptions. I mean, I think some people get incredibly lucky and will get an agent that's willing to work with them editorially, or a publisher that's willing to put time into developing them. But it's so tough, and margins are so tough that you really want to come to them with your best work in hand.
And it sounds like you had, by that stage as well, gathered around you a community of writers and like established people to be able to give you that advice. It sounds like you wouldn't have known it was ready unless you had that community around you.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you're like me, Jo, and do you ever go to the back and read the acknowledgements of a book?
Yes.
Like before, I often do it before I read the book. I kind of almost get a sense of like, okay, this is someone who has, I don't know, you get a sense of how they came to it or something. You get a sense of who, I don't know, I like knowing the kind of a little bit of the history of how the book came to be before I start writing the book. And I remember being really, it used to make me sad when I was, in that stage where I was really struggling to write my book, because it seemed like everyone who had written a book knew all these writers and knew all these amazing people. And what I realized is if you continue to show up and in creative spaces and in your own work and read other people's work, and by the time you finish the book, you have made that network. And like my friends joke that I have the longest acknowledgements in the world. They're pretty long. Actually, you build that. It's almost like, it's not, oh, you have that and you write a book. It's like you write a book and that starts to grow around you. And that's what I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And an important thing too is to look where you are. So not, sometimes people write to me and they're like, oh, I'd love to take you out for coffee. And it's like, well, I don't know you. Yeah. And I'm busy trying to write my own stuff. Whereas I really sought out writers that were at a similar level, and, have a lot of writer friends who we were drafting our first books together, and now we've got all our, first or second books published. And that was really important, as well as finding people that are kindly kind of willing to give you advice, which I definitely benefited from a lot. And writers are just such a, almost without exception in my experience. We spend a lot of time alone, like we're a bit weird, but we're also very kind. Like we really, I believe a rising tide raises all boats. I think it's good for Australian literature when writers support and promote and help each other. And maybe that's also that because I've ended up in crime, which is, I think, the best genre to be a writer in, because the people are just so friendly and helpful and kind of energetic. And maybe it's because we've got really great readers. There's this feeling of like plenty or something that, and I think partly, when you love a book and someone recommends another book that you might, there's a kind of virtual circle to that too. Yeah.
I think that's really important, and I think we underplay it in the arts in general, actually, like how important that building that community of people around you. And as you say, it's people talk about having good contacts, like you need good contacts to make it in the arts. And like, while mentors and everything is important, like, as building the contemporaries around you as well, and supporting each other's work, and in your case, reading each other's
like
work.
The number of students I would teach who were in their first or second year of a creative writing degree who hadn't been to a book event, like a book launch. Like, go to the stuff that is there, because those are your people. That will be where you find the people that are going to help you get through it. And I hate the word network. Like, I personally really struggled with the idea of networking.
Yeah.
But once I realized, like, no, I'm just trying to find people that I like, that I can talk to about the stuff I like.
Yes.
And then they become the people that tell you about a residency that's happening, or that, but it's not trying to get something from them first. It's how can we kind of connect to each other. Again, I'm aware I sound a bit sort of Pollyanna-y, but I think it comes back to,
it sounds like a lot of hard work. I don't think it sounds Pollyanna-y. It's actually
like, people can tell if you're just looking at them to give you something, versus like, oh, tell me what you're working on, and let me get to know you. And I think one of the things I really dislike is when I meet someone and they're looking over my shoulder to see if there's someone who can be of more help to them.
Yes.
I don't think that's a way to connect with people at all. And I think sometimes it's the surprising, finding genuine connection with people leads to good things.
Yes.
For your career, I think, rather than using people, like thinking of people as instruments to get what you want.
Yeah. Once the book was published, when was the moment where, was there a moment when you're like, oh, this is actually going to be successful? Or did you always have a sense that this book was going to, like, honestly,
the opposite. Down? It was, I remember really distinctly, like, thinking I was going to get a phone call, like, oh, we've just realized it was like Hayley Scrivenor, whose book we want to publish. And I was, until I remember the first day it was released, I was walking into a bookstore, and a woman and her daughter were walking out, and the woman was holding my book. She'd just bought it.
Wow.
And that was the first moment that it came to me that it was a real thing in the world, because I didn't know her.
Yes.
And she didn't know me, and she was buying my book. It happened to be book of the month at that bookstore,
Right.
And that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, okay. Like, they're actually maybe not going to take it away from me. Like, a mistake hasn't been made, or if it has, it's too late,
Yeah, it's too late out there now.
So no, I never felt confident about that. And I always tell my students, like, you don't have to feel good writing it, like during the writing of it, for it to make someone feel, strongly in a good way.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm the worst judge of how my writing is going, because sometimes when I think it's going really great, that's when I haven't sunk deep enough into it. I'm just kind of skating across the surface, and I'm really happy because lots of words are happening. but I haven't actually sunk into. But again, maybe that's just goes back to what you were saying about if I'm not suffering, sometimes I feel like I'm not working.
Yeah.
I think I always say, like, you know, John Candy in Cool Runnings, like maybe it's not the most, there's a moment where he says, if you're not enough before the gold medal, you won't be enough after it. I stole that from the writer Anne Lamott, you know, and she sort of uses that to say, it comes back to cultivating that sense of yourself as someone who does things that you care about outside of how successful those things are. And I do think that's a really important thing for a writer or any creative person or any person in any field to kind of cultivate.
When it came then time to write the second, so you have all this success with the first novel and then the second novels, and I'm hoping you're writing a third novel as well. So when did it then become, this is going pretty well and I can say, yeah, this is my career now, or I'm just...
Well, there was a point. So my publisher have signed my next, so I'm working on book 3 and they've signed that book and my next 2 books. And that was a moment where I was like, oh my God, like, because I get 3 years a book, that's a decade of my life spoken for. And there's no way that's not a career. Like, even if every book I write from here on fails dismally and they have to pay me out of my contract, like, I've had a career of some description, and that was a real proud kind of moment, and also shows the depths of the kind of negative, you know, but I do think it's good to kind of stay low to the ground with this stuff because you can, I always say being a writer is a bit like being on the Tower of Terror of self-esteem, you know, that I think it was it Wonderland, you know, they take you all the way up and then they drop you. And what you want to kind of do is sort of live in the middle. Like, I work hard at this thing, I care about it, I show up for it regularly, but it is not everything that I am, and it is not kind of, I'm not a genius, but I'm also not the most stupid person on the planet. So I think I've wandered off from your question, but second book sort of, look, I think the thing I've realized is that the work is the point, like the pleasure of being, we often tend to want to think, like I did at the beginning of my writing career, of the book with your name on the front and talking at Sydney Writers Festival about the book. But actually, if you're in the right place and you're doing the right thing, the point is the doing of the thing, you know? And so I try and bring myself back to caring about the people that I'm writing about and the sentences, and not, it's very easy to go, oh, wonder what people will say, and I hope they say nice things, and I hope they, and I care very deeply about the reader because, you know, we're all so time poor, like that someone would pick up a book that I've written and spend hours of their life with characters that I have invented. Like, that's a real privilege. I don't want to waste that time. I take it very seriously. You know, and I know I write books like other forms of entertainment, you know, maybe we don't think about them as life-saving or life-changing, but they have been for me. And so I try and hold that level of seriousness in my, and kind of dedicate myself to it in a way that makes it hopefully not all about me. And some days I succeed and some days I don't. But it comes back to, you know, I'm not digging ditches in the sun again.
No. I feel like I'm getting like a lot of life coach advice here, Hayley. Like, a lot of what you're saying is like really resonating with me. And I was like I'm so passionate about like doing this podcast and the current work that I'm doing. And I was just like, I have to like enjoy. And sometimes that is so hard. Like I just felt like I had to name like how hard it is to really just stay in the joy of it, particularly when you're starting out and not knowing where this is going to go. Like, I don't know where this is going to go. And I
think it is the human challenge, right? We don't know how it's going to turn out. Writing is maybe a more extreme example because of all the kind of cultural knowledge we have around writing. Like, we know we have this idea of a montage of someone in a turret, you know, writing by candlelight or whatever. But everyone actually has to figure out what they want to do in the world and how they're going to do it. And that is that is the unique human thing. And we are by nature kind of looking around us and going, is this what I should be doing, you know, all the time? And it's not as simple as like follow your dreams, you know, the glass slipper approach, but it's not as simple as just do what's safe, because sometimes what's safe is not safe because it's not the right fit. But that uncertainty is a thing we all share, and I think that is the stuff of life, is working that stuff out. You know, it's kind of like the problem is the point. Like, if we didn't have to struggle to find this stuff, then it wouldn't matter in the way that it does.
Yeah. It's the quote Tom Hanks. Just I'm going to quote a movie back at you now. In Tom Hanks in League of Their Own, where he goes, "It's the hard that makes it's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't
Yeah.
hard, everybody would be doing it. It's
Yeah,
the hard that makes it
exactly.
great." Yeah.
That's, and I think that's where the meaning comes from, is kind of that it's not just handed to you, and I think we have a deep desire to be useful in some way and to kind of
Yeah.
use our talents, such as they are, for something that we can see we are able to do. I don't know. I think there is really something special about that, but it's also going to change, and the way we feel about it is going to change over our lives. And it comes back to, like, there is no option where there isn't a bit of suffering, or a bit of
Yeah. That's
angst,
right.
or a bit of whatever.
Yeah.
But it's trying to find that place that where we feel we're of service, and kind of a bit where we're meant to be, not perfectly, not 100%
Yeah.
glass slipper where we're meant to be, but yeah,
Close enough.
close enough.
I wanted to also, like, we're wrapping up, but I did want to know about because it strikes me like a lot of what you're saying around, I think in Australia we have this we do have this tall poppy thing that anyone that's successful, we kind of tend to pull them down, where sometimes I think we need a bit of the American kind of, or an English, propping ourselves up more. And I wondered, with your book being successful overseas too, whether you noticed, whether being around authors in other countries, you notice a different level of confidence, or do they have similar struggles to what Australian authors might have?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my experience is quite different when I've been to events in the US and events in the UK and events in Australia, and I guess because Dirt Town was a #1 bestseller here. It was the best-selling book by a debut author in the year that it came out, and it was one of those books where if you hadn't read it, you'd kind of heard about it, which
Yeah.
is very rare. Only a few books get to be in that category in any given week, month, year, and so that was a real privilege, and it came with it a lot of people that were like, "Oh, I've heard of your book. I haven't read it," and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And also people who look slightly unimpressed that you're there because why have you gotten to be in
Right.
that slot and not
Yes.
them? And I understand that, you sort of
Yeah.
they're having that battle with themselves and their mind about their perception of success, but I think, and then I've gone somewhere like the UK where my book is, I was at a festival, no one had heard of me, no one had kind of read it.
Right.
It won quite a prestigious award, which was amazing. Like that did
Yes.
help. My publisher were very happy, but I was
Yeah.
still, I realized, like, again, it kind of comes back to the work. Like the actual thing that I was making is the same, and the
Yeah.
perceptions of it are outside my control.
Yeah.
So I think I made good strategic decisions about my career, and that's nice. But actually, the thing that I can mainly control is the work. So
Right.
in a way, being in a room where people are looking at you and they don't really see you because their idea of you is that you're very successful and maybe more successful than you deserve to be, is actually very similar to standing in a room where no one knows who you are. Because in both
Right.
cases, they don't see the work that you've done, and they don't kind of, they're dealing with their version of you, I guess. So it's really interesting to be kind of at the bottom of the heap and the top of the heap at the same time, because the work hasn't changed. And
Yeah.
so that really helped me really helped me see all I can control is the bit that I do,
Yeah.
And I'm lucky. I've always loved events. I have no problem getting up on stage talking about my book. I love
Yeah.
interviewing other authors. I
Yeah.
like being what Kate Mildenhall calls a good literary citizen. I love going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
stuff. Um,
Yes.
and that's all part of the joy of it. But if you get too caught up in external perceptions of what you're doing, then that really steals the joy, I guess.
Yeah.
And all of that's predicated on, again, I think there are just incredible writers that I admire so much who do not make a living wage from their writing, and that shouldn't be, but it is the case. And so again, that idea of prestige or ego, or again, it comes back to, I'm doing the work that I'm capable of doing, and that I want to offer up, and I'm managing that with whatever else is going on in life, and that's all anyone can ask of anyone, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hayley, I could talk to you for hours, but I want you to get back to working on that third book. So
I am working on a third book, I can assure you.
excellent. Well, I really look forward to it. I have so enjoyed this conversation. It's been amazing to talk to you. And yeah, thank you for your writing. Definitely a gift for me. I absolutely adore it. So, congratulations on your career, and I appreciate you coming onto my podcast to talk about it.
Well, thanks for having me. I think it's really important to have conversations about these kind of bigger questions because it matters. You know, I do. I believe that we can't talk about it enough, really. You know, I love this stuff. I love how you make a life, how you make a living. They're important. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, and see you all next time. Thanks. Bye.